This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Today's episode of Rewilding In Action is supported by Ribbonwood Nurseries that's based in Dunedin. I've planted hundreds of their trees, shrubs and ferns and been very happy with how well they've grown, as well as the knowledge and the friendliness of the owners and staff. You can contact Ribbonwood Nurseries through their website at ribbonwoodnurseries.co.nz or call them on 03 453 4673. Kia ora, ko Maureen Howard tōku ingoa. Welcome to Rewilding In Action. I'm Maureen Howard, the host of this show. I've come to Allen's Beach Road on the Otago Peninsula to meet rewilders Shaun and Helen Murphy, who are passionate about protecting the invertebrates living on their 20-hectare property that is naturally regenerating back to native bush. One of the special invertebrate species living here is Peripatus, a fascinating caterpillar-like invertebrate, which the fossil records show hasn't changed for 500 million years. I'm here to find out more about the invertebrates living here, why they're critical, and to learn about the multi-species pest control Shaun is doing to protect them. Join me as Shaun tells me about the history of the site as we walk down their driveway that's flanked with Kanika and other regenerating natives.
So 20 years ago when we came to this property, it was just Kanuka here, and everything that you can see that's growing under the Kanuka canopy here is naturally regenerated and quite diverse. There's probably half a dozen different native trees growing here, including tree ferns, which
yes, I see one there.
Weren't on the property at all 20 years ago. And
you decided to put 10 hectares into the QE2, isn't that right?
So when we arrived, there was a 3-hectare covenant already, which had been put in place on a very steep part of the property, and we've added a 7-hectare covenant to that. So half the property is now under a QE2 covenant, and we're currently in negotiations with QE2 to put most of the other half under a QE2 covenant.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. Right. But of course, when you first came to the property, was invertebrates your biggest interest then?
Well, as a boy, I've always had a particular interest in moths, and I used to pester my father to take me out at night with spotlights trying to find moths. Never very successfully. Didn't really know what we were doing, but the interest has always been there. And so when we came to this property, it was a real opportunity to actually do it seriously with a bit of research behind it. And I'm a great believer in iNaturalist, which has been fantastic for me in terms of learning about the species here and their distribution. And it's taken me all over the South Island.
Oh, really? Looking for rare moths?
Yeah, doing for field work as a field work assistant, mostly for Carry Knox moths and lizards.
Oh, right. I didn't know that, Shaun. That's really great. Yeah, and so what about you, Helen? Has this been a love of invertebrates that you've developed over time?
I wouldn't say that, but my interest has grown in a couple of, in particular, stick insects. I love stick insects.
Yes.
And I'm also interested in Peripatus.
So you've got Peripatus on the property?
We do.
Yes. Every night when we take our dog for a walk in the winter when it's dark, Helen and I have a Peripatus hunting competition. So there's a little area that we'll come to later, about 20 metres of bank where the Peripatus hunt at night, and with our head torches. Yeah. So we've got quite a competition going that's become very, very competitive. Our record for just this little 20-metre stretch is 11.
Wow, okay, right.
But Helen started to get
a good eye for them.
Yes.
You sort of know when you're going to get a good night because of the weather, and if it's been raining, they come out more in damp conditions, and if it's a bit warmer.
So I understand that in some parts of the property you have planted, in some places, but in most of it you've been naturally regenerating. So how did you make your decisions?
Well, in this particular case, the decision was made by Helen because it was the entrance to the property and she didn't like the gorse that was here. But the other thing was that despite being great disciples of Hugh Wilson up at Hiniwai on Banks Peninsula, we recognised that in this particular area there was no secondary growth under the gorse. It was just gorse and nothing for years and years. So we made the decision to take the gorse out and replant with initially Nios and then Tarata, Kahuhu, and some more exotic stuff as the bigger plants established. Pseudopanax there and Coprosmas, broadleaf. And this beautiful tree here is Okaka, which is not well known, really. It grows particularly well on this property. And these are seedlings from the valley across.
And so you're actually benefiting a lot from their property, from the seed source,
yes,
would you say?
Yes, very much so, yeah. Particularly seeds delivered here by birds, but also seedlings delivered here by Peter.
The human disperser.
Yes, he's a human bird, if you like. Yes.
Yeah. But obviously on 20 hectares you can't be planting everywhere, but close to the house and in these visible parts where people are driving up the driveway.
Particularly planting in areas where either we or the local fire service have deemed that there's a high fire risk because of a combination of gorse and carnuka and growing together is highly flammable. So in those situations we've removed the gorse and we've planted less flammable plants such as Nio, broadleaf, Pittosporums, Tarata.
Yes, and they can act as a bit of a new seed source for the next generation.
So, yeah.
And we're passing by some lovely poroporo, which is a wonderful pioneer species.
Yes.
You've literally got you've got a bit of a sea of it here, haven't you?
Yes, we have. So several years ago, I asked the local volunteer fire brigade to come and do an assessment, a fire risk assessment on the property, and they identified this particular area as being quite a risk to our house if there was a forest fire. It's north of the house, so a northerly wind would drive the fire up towards our property, and so they identified this as a high fire risk. So a couple of years ago, my friend Alf Webb and I spent a whole winter clearing the gorse, which we're now burning as firewood. And we then, in many areas, we've replanted with Nios, but Poru just took over and it's brought in lots of seedlings. Not all of them good. Banana passion fruit amongst them, so it's a bit of a mission to keep that down.
Yeah.
Now there is a lot of natural regrowth, and because this was a north-facing, dry, exposed slope, there was very little secondary growth under the original gorse. But now, with the Poroporo and the Nios that we've planted, we're getting a lot of secondary growth.
So it's really worthwhile just waiting to see a little bit what happens, isn't it? If there's no sign of native regeneration coming through the gorse, then you maybe need to take action. As well as for you in this situation, you did have to anyway because of the fire risk. So.
Yes, that's right. There's another area further on, of a similar area of gorse, but it has a slightly different aspect, and the regeneration under there is completely different, just by a sort of a 15-degree difference in aspect.
Okay.
It's wetter, it's damper, it's not quite so exposed to the northerly wind, and there's significantly more natural regeneration. So that's a sort of Hiniwai situation where it's working very well, but there are several areas like this area here where there was just no regeneration happening, and so we're sort of playing God, really.
But you're starting with species that are very local to here.
Very much so.
We're just passing by a clay bank, and I've often talked about how good clay banks are usually for native bees, but in this situation we have native peripatus. Yes,
the local peripatus to Dunedin, which has only recently been described actually, are Peripatoides otipoti, which I think is a lovely name. And they come out at night. It needs to be a warm, moist, humid night, and they'll come out onto the surface of the bank hunting, and sometimes we've seen them with a kill. Sometimes it's a spider, flatworms. And one of the interesting things we've noted is that when one of the peripatus actually kills something, others seem to appear. It's a bit like a different scale, but a pride of lions on the African savannah.
Yeah.
When a lion makes a kill, the others turn up.
It's very exciting, isn't it?
It has been for us. I'd never heard of Peripatus until we moved here.
Yeah.
And now they're a real joy. And one of the things with our pest control is that if we have an area where we know there's Peripatus, we actually target that area with toxin because to keep the mice and rat numbers down.
Okay, right. And we'll talk a bit about that later, because why you're getting all these fantastic vertebrates on your property.
Yeah. So when we arrived here, even though this is all natural regeneration, it was heavily browsed and there were no tree ferns here. There were stray sheep, and we had a problem in this area with deer. There was a number of deer had been released from a failed deer farm on Hooper's Inlet, and they'd sort of gone wild, and they browsed the top out of a lot of the trees that were growing. And there were huge possum numbers, and the rabbits weren't controlled at all. We sort of managed to get on top of all of those things. The sheep are gone, the deer are gone, the possums are gone now, and our dog Meg keeps the rabbit numbers manageable. And as a consequence, we've had this extraordinary regeneration, which you can see all around us.
It is. It's absolutely beautiful. And we just passed a live trap there. What's the reason for having them?
So I run 8 live capture cage traps here, which have to be checked every day, which we do religiously, sometimes twice a day. And their main purpose is basically monitoring for possums, but we do catch ferrets mainly in them in the summer, usually January, February, which is pretty unpleasant. As a boy, I used to keep ferrets as a pet, and they're the most delightful animals. They become tame and friendly and highly intelligent, and it's really difficult to deal with them here. And we also catch feral cats in them, particularly in the winter when food's hard to come by. But the primary purpose of them is basically monitoring for possums and re-invasion of possums.
Yes. And it's been wonderful news recently how, well, hopefully the peninsula is possum free.
Yeah, well, we haven't seen one for 3 years, and we run these 8 traps, and we also have a number of trail cameras, and which we check regularly, and we just haven't seen a possum. So I'm pretty confident that at the moment we are possum free.
Yeah. And so we are passing this lovely Muhlenbeckia. Now here, you're not worried about it, are you?
No, if I've planted a valuable podocarp, because there's very little podocarp regeneration on the peninsula because they're nearly all gone. So the only way we can have podocarps here is by planting them, then I will protect it from Muhlenbeckia. But by and large, I'm a great fan of Muhlenbeckia. It has a very high number of invertebrates, and it's the invertebrates here that are the glue of the ecosystem. They hold everything together. We're very fortunate in having extremely high rifleman numbers here, and there are 2 reasons for that. One is that we put out, with the help of STOPS over the Otago Peninsula, we put out predator-proof boxes, nest boxes. We have 36 of them here. But the other reason is that we have very high invertebrate numbers, which allows us to have a very high density of riflemen. And so, for example, this last season, we had rifleman boxes that were just 10 metres apart, that in the same brood had nests in them. So it meant that there was so much food around that they could nest close together. What you often find in places where there are very low invertebrate numbers is that riflemen have a much bigger area.
Yeah, so it's really showing that, as you say, invertebrates are at the base of the food chain.
Yes.
For many of our birds and our riflemen.
Well, our birds and lizards, and they perform critical roles in pollination as well, particularly the moths, which is not very well recognised. And then if you think that in Muhlenbeckia we have at least 15 species of moths that I've recorded here that use Muhlenbeckia. That's a huge number of caterpillars every summer that are munching away at the Muhlenbeckia, and their frass, their poo, is fertilising the ground, which is enriching the soil. These denuded pastoral soils need enriching, and so the Muhlenbeckia is providing that service through the insects that feed on it.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting to know. That's right. So what other invertebrates are here? So Helen, you said you've got, and you're holding out this flax to me, which we've carried all the way.
Yeah, this is a flax leaf, and a really useful thing that I find if I go anywhere new to gauge how healthy the ecosystem is to look at the flax leaves. Flax leaves are everywhere, and gardeners would say, "Oh God, what's going on with this flax leaf? It's completely peppered with these beautiful slots, which are known as windows."
So it's not an actual hole, but it's eaten it on the underside. It's right. So what has done this?
So this is the flax window moth, which is a beautiful, large geometrid moth. Often very pale and ghost-like. It's a beautiful moth, not often seen, but it's very common. It tells me is that nobody's been spraying pesticides. Right. So when I go to somebody's house or another property, or I look at the flax leaves to see whether they've got flax window moths, and then I look at the edges to see whether they've got these notches. And these notches are caused not by the moth itself, but by the caterpillar of the flax notcher moth. So the flax notcher moth, Ignuticus stereopastis, causes these notches. So if you look at a leaf like this, it's a really good indication that it's a healthy ecosystem. Nobody's been spraying pesticides. And it also tells me that because of all these moths, there's lots of caterpillars. And because there's lots of caterpillars, there'll be lots of birds. And because there's lots of moths and caterpillars, there'll be lots of frass, and the soil will be enriching. And so it's just an easy indicator. Wherever you go, there's going to be a flax leaf, and you can see. You can go to some gardens, beautiful native gardens, and the leaves will be immaculate, but you know that's because they've been spraying.
I think people just think this is a fungus or a disease of some description, rather than it being made by a moth.
Well, I am going to be looking on the lookout from now on and commiserating with people if their flax is looking all pristine.
That's right. So another invertebrate that we encountered here, well, there's several actually, but one that's caused a bit of a stir is that there was one on this clay bank actually one evening. I found a beautiful beetle, which I photographed and put on iNaturalist. I don't know anything about beetles really, and it turned out to be the New Zealand reticulate stag beetle, quite a small beetle with attractive pattern on it. It doesn't have antlers or whatever. But the interesting thing about it is that it's not supposed to be found south of Waimate. It's caused a bit of a stir in the beetle world. And there's been a suggestion that it's somehow been introduced to the property. It shouldn't be here. They feed on rotten wood, so that means at some point somebody would have to have brought some wood from north of Waimate down to this property historically, if that's the case. It could have been here all the time, and it may be that it's only the pest control that's now allowed it to show its head above the parapet, if you like. But
I wonder if there'd be any slight differences in the genetics between this population and Waimate?
Yes, so I've been talking to somebody in Dock who's suggested that might be a way to find out if we can find the money to do it.
That's really exciting
isn't
for
it?
you.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
because I have no idea otherwise how they got here.
Yeah.
And the suggestion was that because the Otago University has turned out so many zoologists for hundreds of years, at some point one of them would have found it on the peninsula if it had been here.
A little plantain. So, because there was some bush here, even though it was in quite a degraded form, you think all of these different species, all of these invertebrates were here, but their numbers have been able to proliferate, isn't that right?
I think they sort of possibly hiding out in gullies and remote parts of the peninsula, and as the bush has come back, they've been able to spread out. And on this particular property, I really feel that we've been doing nearly 20 years of pest control, multi-species pest control, which has changed and evolved over the time. I certainly wouldn't be doing what I was doing 20 years ago now. Science and technology has advanced. But I think overall there's been great benefit, particularly to the invertebrates. And it's, as I say, it's the invertebrates that are driving the energy in the ecosystem here.
Yeah. But so we should talk a little bit about the pest control. Obviously, the habitat has to be here.
Yes.
But the second big key thing is getting the numbers down. What do you feel is their particular impact on the invertebrate population?
So studies have shown that rats and mice eat a lot of invertebrates, and what that means is if the rats and mice are eating the invertebrates, the native animals aren't. So there's far less food for the native birds and lizards if you've got a high levels of rats and mice. I also think that rats and mice have a big impact on native plant regeneration. They're eating the seeds and they're eating the seedlings. They're not just eating birds' eggs and birds. And I suspect once you get the rats and mice under control, you have a very different regeneration pattern in terms of botanical diversity and density of regeneration. One of the things that does concern me is a lot of pest control projects focus particularly on rats and mustelids, and they ignore the mice. And mice numbers can become very high if rat numbers are high, mice numbers are low, and so there's a balance between the two. But you take out the rats and the mustelids, and the mice numbers can become unmanageable. We see them running around. I mean, I've been in Fiordland, also the Hunter Valley, where mice are just running away in front of you because the numbers are so high. And those mice will be decimating the seed sources, they'll be decimating the invertebrates, and at some stages they will also be hunting and out-competing lizards and birds. So mice, there's a strong research now showing that mice have this huge negative impact on ground-dwelling geckos, particularly the ground-dwelling geckos that we have here, the Corero gecko, which is a beautiful gecko. And so wherever I know that we've got strong Corero gecko populations, I target that area for mice with toxin. And it's had a huge positive impact by doing that.
So what is the poison that you do use?
Right, so when I started out, I was using brodifacoum, which was the standard. Everyone was using it, DOC as well. And then a lot of research showed that it's highly eco-persistent. You can't get rid of it. And once it gets into an animal, it just builds up. At one stage, DOC were saying, I'm not sure they are now, but you could only use brodifacoum once or twice, in fact, in the entire life of animals that you were trying to protect. So if you had a robin that lived for 3 years, you could use brodifacoum twice.
In that area?
Yeah. The problem here is that we have Corero geckos which live for over 40 years. So you could use brodifacoum twice in 40 years. So clearly brodifacoum is not going to happen, and it just, you can't get rid of it once it's in the ecosystem. It builds up. So then I moved to difascinone, which is a much milder anticoagulant toxin, and it's very good for rats but hopeless for mice. Mice can go through a breeding cycle whilst feeding on it.
Okay.
So you get into that situation where mice numbers become very high. So then I heavily went into trapping using Victor snap traps. I had 60 Victor snap traps, which was quite a lot of work. And that was great for about 7 or 8 years. And then I suspect because of, it sounds really wacky, but the bird life changed its habits. And I'd only ever seen riflemen, Titi punamu, feeding in the canopy. And then suddenly one year they started feeding on the ground. And I think it's because the Titi punamu numbers had become very high, and so they were feeding everywhere they could, and because of that we started catching them in the Victor snap traps.
Right.
So I withdrew all the Victor snap traps, went to DOC 200s, so we run now 30 DOC 200s, and then went to a toxin called double tap, which is a combination of difascinone and cholecalciferol, and that combination seems to knock over mice, and there's a couple of studies have shown that it will take out, one study shows 76% of mice and another study shows 85%, and I think that's probably good enough, and has very low persistence in the environment, and it has very low risk of secondary poisoning to non-target species. So that's where we're at now. We run 30 DOC 200s, 8 cage traps, and we run 70 bait stations with double tapping, and that's about as much as we can manage, to be honest.
It's absolutely tremendous. And do you help out with this, Helen, or watch in amazement?
I accompany him on the rounds, but some of those traps are really strong, and I just watch.
Yeah.
Occasionally we'll let blackbirds out of cages once they've gone in the live.
Oh, the live traps. Yeah.
But no, I prepare the coffee and the biscuits.
Essential work as well. Absolutely.
So this might be an interesting thing. This is a puta weta. And when we arrived here, it was chest high, and the top of it was being eaten out by deer. And you can see some historical scratching from possums, but they're gone now. So rescued it from deer and then rescued it from possums, along with a lot of other people working hard.
I guess that's a very physical sign of success.
It is. It's good to look at and feel good about each time I walk past it.
And so what do you love about living here, Helen?
Every morning we walk around the property doing the traps, but it's just the sound of the birds, it's the wind in the trees, it's just the air, the pureness of it. It's, just away from that hustle and bustle that millions of people live in. We're just incredibly fortunate, and we know it. It's a wonderful place.
Thanks very much to my guests Shaun and Helen Murphy for taking me on a tour of part of their lovely property and for introducing me to some of the small and very special creatures living there. A key message from this episode is that if we're going to trap or poison, we need to focus on multi-species invasive mammal control. That importantly also includes mice. From a rewilding perspective, poisons are a last but sometimes necessary resort. Now, to cover the costs of their pest control, Shaun and Helen rent out an accommodation called Possum's End. So if you want to contribute to their project, this is a way to do it. Thanks for listening to Rewilding in Action. I'm Maureen Howard. In my next episode, I talk with researchers David Orlovich and Matt Larkham about the importance of mycorrhizal fungi growing under regenerating bush. So until then, I will leave you with birdsong from the property of Shaun and Helen Murphy, rewilders who are letting nature take the lead.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.